By the time anyone realized she was missing, she'd already been gone for 29 hours, 12 minutes, and 16 seconds. What really happened that night will leave you questioning everything. It's one of those stories that eats away at you, making you doubt every assumption you've ever made. The truth? It's almost too dark to bear. The search had been frantic. Police lights flashing, voices calling her name, the whole town whispering behind closed doors, yet not a single lead, not a single trace of her. Could someone simply vanish without a sound? That was the question everyone asked, but no one had an answer. What they didn't know, however, was that the girl they were desperately searching for wasn't lost. She wasn't trapped or taken or wandering aimlessly. She was buried deep beneath the shadows of her own secrets. Secrets so powerful they could swallow a life whole, never to be seen again. But the darkness doesn't just hide you, it distorts everything it touches. And as the hours ticked by, the lies began to unravel, pulling at the threads of a twisted reality no one was prepared for. Was she really lost? Or had she simply disappeared on purpose? Did she know too much? And if she had, why didn't she try to fight back? The questions would eat away at the hearts of those who loved her until they couldn't tell where the truth ended and the lies began. All they could do was search, praying for an answer, but the deeper they dug, the more they realized that they might have been looking in the wrong place all along. The night had changed her, and now it was about to change everything for everyone. Hit that subscribe button and click the notification so you don't miss the next story. Lila Bennett was everything you could want in a friend. Fun, energetic, and always the life of the party. Her laughter was infectious, her spirit undeniable, and whenever she entered a room, it lit up with an energy that made everyone feel seen, valued, and appreciated. She was the kind of person you couldn't help but gravitate towards. Her friends loved her for her kindness, her zest for life, and the way she could turn any dull moment into an adventure. Her family adored her, her parents proud of the bright future ahead of her, and her younger siblings who looked up to her as if she were a hero. But one night, everything changed. What seemed like another ordinary evening out with friends would soon spiral into a tragedy no one could have anticipated. Lila's world, and the world of everyone around her, would come crashing down in an instant, and no one could have prepared for the heartbreak that was to follow. It began innocently enough. Lila had been spending the evening with her closest friends, laughing and making memories as they always did. They had celebrated another school week, and the excitement of being young and free made them feel like the world was theirs to conquer. The hours passed quickly, and Lila's laughter was a constant soundtrack to the night. As the night wore on, no one saw it at first. How could they? After all, she was just Lila, the life of the party. No one expected the shift that would happen beneath the surface, and no one could have predicted the nightmare that was about to unfold. Her family and friends never saw it coming. What they thought was a teenage girl having fun, a girl simply living her life, enjoying a night out with friends, would soon become a tragedy they would never recover from. They couldn't know that hidden beneath Lila's carefree smile, a storm was brewing. The secrets she kept buried, the struggles she had faced in silence, had been growing in the shadows. No one could have imagined that one small incident, one moment, one decision would shatter everything they thought they knew. Lila had always been the strong one, the one everyone turned to when they needed support or a listening ear. But who was there for her when she needed someone? Who could have possibly known the weight she carried, the pressures, the fears, the brokenness that lived beneath the surface where no one could see? For Lila, it all became too much. Cracks, the silent battles, the overwhelming emotions that she had kept hidden so well for so long finally came to a head. It wasn't just about one bad choice. It wasn't just one moment in time. It was everything that had been slowly building up inside her, all the things she had never spoken of, all the pain she had kept locked away. And when the night ended, Lila wasn't just missing, she was lost. Lost in a way no one could have understood, until it was far too late. Her disappearance was only the beginning of the nightmare. As the days passed, the search grew more desperate. Her family clung to hope, unable to fathom the possibility that their bright, energetic daughter was gone. Her friends were in disbelief, unable to reconcile the image of Lila laughing and joking with them only hours before with the empty spaces that now filled their lives. But as the hours turned into days and the search continued with no results, the heartbreaking truth began to settle in. Something far darker had taken hold of Lila. and the consequences of that night were far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Lila's secrets were far more dangerous than they had realized. The cracks in her life had gone unnoticed, the warning signs ignored, and now the people who loved her would be left to pick up the pieces of a tragedy they never saw coming. What had really happened that night? What was the catalyst that pushed Lila to the edge? The truth was far more complicated than anyone could have imagined, and it would take a long, painful journey to uncover it. What her friends and family couldn't see, what they didn't know, was that the darkness had been creeping in for a long time, unnoticed, until it was far too late to stop. As the story of Lila Bennett unfolded, the town was forced to confront a truth they weren't prepared for. Her life, her struggles, had been more than just an open book. They had been an intricate web of hidden pain, misunderstood emotions, and a desperate need for help that no one could see. And in the aftermath of the tragedy, her family and friends would be left to ask themselves one question that would haunt them forever. Could they have done something differently? Could they have saved her? The answers, though, wouldn't come easy. As they began to uncover the truth behind Lila's disappearance, the lines between what was real and what had been fabricated started to blur. The story that everyone thought they knew, the story of a carefree girl living her life, wasn't the whole story at all, and the truth would turn out to be something no one could have prepared for. A revelation that would change. The night started like any other. Lila and her friends, including her best friend Emma and her childhood crush Matt, had spent the evening celebrating the thrill of youth. They'd been out all night, making memories and laughing at the world's little inconveniences. But there was something different about this night. A strange energy in the air, an unspoken tension no one could quite pinpoint. As the night deepened and the stars blanketed the sky, Lila and her friends made their way to a secluded spot by the river. The spot was their secret haven, a place where they could escape the noise of the world and just be. It was the kind of place where memories were made, where time slowed down and everything felt safe. Lila, with her infectious laughter and her free-spirited personality, was the life of the party, as always. But something happened that night that would shatter everything. What happened after that? No one knew, at least not for sure. The events that unfolded in the hours following were as murky as the river they sat beside. There were whispers, frantic, confused accounts from the others who had been there, but no one could put the pieces together. It was as if the night had swallowed her whole, and the more they tried to recall the details, the more they realized how much they had missed. Something was off. The moments leading up to her disappearance seemed like a blur to everyone, even Emma and Matt, who had been by her side. Lila had always been the one who would stay behind, the one who always looked out for her friends, the one who made sure no one was left alone. But that night she vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but confusion and a deep, suffocating sense of dread. She swore she had seen Lila walk toward the woods, but she had no idea why. It wasn't like Lila to just leave, especially after all the fun they'd been having. And Matt had been the last to see her. But his memory of the moments before she disappeared was fractured, filled with holes and inconsistencies. Had he seen her leave? Had he said goodbye? Or had something else happened, something neither of them could understand or explain? The police had done their part, canvassing the area and questioning anyone who might have seen something, but with every passing hour, the uncertainty grew. Was there foul play involved? Had something happened to Lila, or had she simply left on her own accord? The questions mounted with no answers, and the more the search continued, the more it seemed that no one had seen anything. The quiet town was plunged into confusion, and yet, beneath the surface of the frantic searches and worried whispers, something darker was lurking. Something that no one could have prepared for. What caused Lila to leave so suddenly? Was it something that had been building up over time? Something no one knew about? A weight that had become too heavy to carry alone? Or had she been running from something in the shadows? Something so terrifying that even she couldn't comprehend it. The truth of what happened that night remained locked in the darkness, hidden somewhere in the shadows of the night. The more they searched for answers, the more it seemed like Lila had slipped through their fingers, disappearing without a trace. Her family, her friends, they had no idea where to turn. It was as if the world had gone silent, leaving them alone with their questions, their fears, and a gnawing sense that they were missing something crucial. It kept retracing their steps, each question leading to another, each discovery taking them further into the unknown. Every time they thought they were close to the truth, it slipped away like water through their fingers. Who was the last to see Lila before she disappeared? Who really knew what had happened that night? The police questioned Emma and Matt, of course. They were the closest to Lila, the ones who had spent the most time with her, but even their accounts didn't line up. There was something off about their statements, something they weren't saying. Emma, so sure of what she had seen, couldn't explain why Lila had disappeared without a word. Matt, who had been with her just before she vanished, seemed to know less than he should. Was he hiding something? Or had the events of that night simply been too overwhelming for him to understand himself? As the hours turned into days, the uncertainty grew. No one had any answers. No one had seen anything. But somewhere in the dark corners of the town, there were whispers. Whispers of something darker, something more sinister than anyone could have imagined. What happened to Lila Bennett wasn't just a story of a missing girl. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would challenge everything the town thought they knew of the people they loved and trusted. And then, as the investigation unfolded, more and more pieces started to fall into place. Pieces no one was ready for. The quiet, seemingly harmless night by the river began to reveal its secrets, and what they uncovered would change everything. What they didn't know was that the truth wasn't just hiding in the shadows. It was lurking, waiting to be discovered. And when it came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. The search for Lila Bennett was just the beginning. The deeper they dug, the more questions they uncovered. Questions that would unravel the lives of those who thought they knew her best. And the answers, they were hidden somewhere in the shadows. Somewhere no one was prepared to look. It was a cool summer night with the scent of damp earth in the air and the promise of adventure lingering in the breeze. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver light on the group gathered by the riverbank. Lila and her friends had claimed this spot many times before. A secret haven where the world seemed to disappear, and all that mattered was the moment. Laughter echoed over the water, mixing with the soft murmur of the river as the group settled in for what should have been an unforgettable night. Lila was at the center of it all, as usual, her energy infectious, her laughter lighting up the night. She had always been the one who could pull everyone in, make the mundane seem magical, and in that moment, everything felt perfect. But there was something about the night, something in the air, that felt different. A strange tension hovered just beyond the warmth of their laughter, an undercurrent that no one could quite put their finger on. As the music played faintly from someone's phone, Lila's smile began to falter. Her eyes, usually bright with excitement, seemed distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. She slowly drifted away from the group, walking toward the edge of the river, her feet brushing against the wet grass. Her friends didn't notice at first, too caught up in their conversations and the carefree joy of youth. But when Lila didn't return, when she didn't join in the next round of jokes or laughter, that's when the unease started to creep in. Something had shifted. It wasn't just the way Lila's energy had changed, it was the way everything felt suddenly out of place. The music had stopped, the laughter faded into the background, and in the stillness of the night, no one could shake the feeling that something was wrong. By then, it was too late. Lila was already gone, her absence the first sign of the darkness that was about to unravel. When Lila didn't return, her friends didn't immediately panic. It wasn't like her to wander off, but she had done it before, gone on little adventures in her own world. Still, the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and the group's laughter turned to whispers. They called out for her, but there was no answer. Anxiety crept into their voices, and finally someone reached for their phone and dialed Lila's parents. Her friends were frantic by the time the sun began to rise, but it wasn't until the morning that anyone thought to call the police. By then, the woods were silent, the air thick with uncertainty. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades cutting through the stillness as the search began in earnest. Police officers combed through the dense forest, calling out for Lila, but there was no sign of her. Belongings, left scattered by the riverbank, offered only the smallest clue of her whereabouts, but they were no closer to finding her. Her parents were beside themselves with grief. They had raised Lila in a small town, a place where everyone knew each other, where the biggest concerns were high school dances and summer vacations. To them, their daughter was invincible, a bright, funny, and loving girl with the world at her feet. How could she just vanish? Was there someone else involved, or someone who knew more than they were saying? The questions seemed endless and the answers more elusive by the hour. The community, once filled with the sounds of laughter and children playing in the streets, was now wrapped in a heavy, suffocating silence. People whispered in hushed tones, exchanging theories and fears. Was it a kidnapping? A random act of violence? Or was there something far darker hiding in the quiet corners of their town? The search for Lila felt like it would never end, yet with each passing hour, the likelihood of finding her alive seemed to slip further away. The town, once a place of peace and security, now felt like a web of uncertainty, a place where anyone could be hiding a secret, and no one knew whom to trust. The discovery came in the morning, just as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. Lila's body was found miles from the riverbank, hidden among the thick underbrush. The silence of the woods was shattered as the discovery sent ripples through the search party. The town, already tense, was thrown into shock. The initial findings were clear. Lila had drowned, the cause of death obvious in the cold, pale skin of her lifeless body. But there were other clues that didn't make sense. Bruises marred her arms, dark and swollen, as though someone had gripped her tightly, forcing her into submission. But what was even more unsettling were the marks around her neck, deep and unmistakable. Evidence of strangulation. It was clear that Lila hadn't just drowned. Something more sinister had happened. The police were now certain that Lila hadn't been alone that night. The bruises, the marks, everything pointed to another person being involved. But who? Who had been with her by the river? Who had been there when she drifted away from the group? Who had seen her last? The questions grew heavier with every new discovery, and with every new clue, the town's grief deepened, morphing into suspicion. The search for answers became urgent, but every lead seemed to turn into a dead end. Who was responsible for this? Was it one of her friends? Someone she trusted? Was it someone from the town? Someone who had been hiding in plain sight? No one knew the truth, but it was clear that the person responsible wasn't as far away as they thought. Someone close to Lila, someone who might have been hiding their own secrets, was now at the heart of the investigation. The more they uncovered, the more tangled the mystery became, and with every new piece of information, the town began to wonder, could they have missed something? Had they been looking in the wrong places all along? What really happened that night by the river, and who was truly to blame? The answers were hidden somewhere in the shadows, and no one, not even the police, was prepared for the truth that would unfold. The forest was dense, and every step felt like it was echoing in the quiet. The air was thick with humidity, and the branches of the trees loomed overhead, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch and move with the wind. The search party had been combing through the area for hours, the faint beams of their flashlights barely piercing the darkness of the woods. Every rustle in the leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot made their hearts race as though the very forest was alive with whispers. With each passing minute, the feeling of helplessness deepened. The ground was uneven, the underbrush thick, making it almost impossible to navigate, and yet they pressed on, the search becoming more desperate with each fruitless step. The woods felt endless, stretching farther than they could see, as if they were trapped in an expanse with no end. The searchers, tired and worn, began to question their purpose. How could they find anything in this sprawling, suffocating darkness? They had walked these woods countless times before, but now they felt like a maze, twisting and turning with no way out. Every time they thought they were getting closer to something, the forest swallowed them back into its oppressive silence. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion that weighed on them. It was the crushing uncertainty. Lila's body had been found, yes, but her death didn't make sense. The evidence didn't match the theory of an accidental drowning. The bruises, the marks around her neck, the strange circumstances of her disappearance, all of it pointed to something far more sinister. Despite the investigation's best efforts, no new answers had come. No new leads had surfaced. They had found the body, but now the hardest part was figuring out why and by whose hand. As the night dragged on, the search party felt an eerie tension settle over them. Every time a twig snapped or the wind howled through the trees, it felt as though Lila's killer was right there, hidden among the shadows, watching them from the dark. There was a palpable sense of being followed, an unsettling sensation that they weren't alone in the woods. The wind whispered through the branches, and in the stillness of the forest, it almost sounded like footsteps. The group's movements became more cautious, their flashlights flickering in the growing fog. The air was thick with anticipation, each person glancing nervously around them, hoping for a sign, a clue, anything that would lead them to the truth. But the more they searched, the more they realized how little they knew, how little they understood. Could the killer be one of their own? Was someone in the search party keeping secrets, hiding their connection to Lila's death? The suspicion, the fear crept into every conversation, every look exchanged. What if someone they trusted was involved? The atmosphere was dark, oppressive, and charged with tension. They could hear the faint sound of a helicopter overhead, its blades cutting through the silence of the forest. But no matter how much they searched, how many trees they knocked on, how many stones they overturned, the truth seemed to stay just out of reach, buried beneath layers of lies and deception. And then there were the strange things they found, clues that didn't fit, the torn fabric near the riverbank, the faint traces of blood on the tree bark, the muddy footprint that seemed too small to belong to an adult. What was Lila doing in this part of the woods? Who had she been with? Who had she been running from? The answers were hidden somewhere in the shadows, just out of reach, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. The more they uncovered, the more they felt as though they were being led in circles. Every new discovery brought more questions, more uncertainty. Every piece of evidence raised more suspicion. The deeper they delved into Lila's life, the more they realized that there were things they hadn't known about her, secrets she had kept hidden, buried deep within her. Was she hiding from something? Or had she been drawn into something darker than anyone could have imagined? Her secrets? And then one evening, when the search had seemed to hit another dead end, the most chilling discovery of all was made. A piece of evidence so horrifying, so unexpected that it shook the entire investigation to its core. It wasn't a body, it wasn't a witness. It was something much darker, much more chilling than anyone could have anticipated. A piece of information that would change everything they thought they knew about Lila and her final moments. As a realization set in, the air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. They weren't just looking for answers anymore. They were looking for a killer. Someone who was still out there, hiding in the dark, watching, waiting. Search had taken on a new urgency, but the deeper they went, the more they realized just how unprepared they were for the truth that awaited them. The truth that had been hiding in the shadows all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it did, nothing in their world would ever be the same again. The days that followed Lila's discovery felt like a blur, the weight of grief pressing down on everyone involved. But as the search turned to investigation and more details came to light, new questions began to form. Questions that cast suspicion on those who had been closest to her. The more the police dug, the more they realized that Lila's death wasn't as simple as it first seemed. There were pieces missing, gaps in the timeline, and shadows hiding the truth. Theories swirled around town. Who could have done this to Lila? Was it someone who had been close to her, or was the culprit a stranger, someone who had come from the outside and left just as quickly? The answers weren't clear, but the investigation had revealed 3 primary suspects, each one carrying their own secrets, their own motives, and their own potential guilt. Emma, Lila's best friend, was the last person to see her alive. Police knew that Emma had been with Lila just before she disappeared, but there were discrepancies in her story. Why had she waited so long to report Lila missing? By the time the authorities were notified, several hours had passed. Was Emma simply in shock, unable to process what had happened? Was there something more to her hesitation? Something she wasn't telling? The bond between Lila and Emma had always seemed unbreakable. They were inseparable, the type of friends who shared everything, secrets, dreams, fears. But something seemed off. Emma's emotions during the search were a mix of confusion, sorrow, and guilt? Investigators couldn't ignore the subtle inconsistencies in her account of the night. She claimed that Lila had walked off on her own, but why hadn't she followed? Why hadn't she immediately called for help when her best friend went missing? Emma insisted that Lila had been acting strangely that night, as if something was bothering her, but she couldn't offer any real explanation. Had Emma known about something darker in Lila's life? Something that could have led to this? Could Emma have been involved in a way that no one expected? The idea that the best friend might be hiding something seemed almost too impossible to consider. Yet, the police couldn't ignore the possibility that Emma might have known more than she was letting on. Andy had felt him in his spirit. He was pulling him aside. He could hear him but didn't fully understand. Matt had always been there for Lila. Through thick and thin, as her childhood friend, he had been a constant in her life. And it was no surprise when he had shown up that night by the river. The two of them had shared a special bond, one that had only grown stronger as they had matured. But as the investigation unfolded, The police began to notice something strange about Matt's behavior during the search. Matt was acting differently than the others. Too calm, too distant. He didn't seem as frantic or worried as the rest of Lila's friends. In fact, he had been oddly quiet when the group gathered to discuss the night's events. When asked about his last moments with Lila, he became defensive and vague. Could his feelings for her have clouded his judgment? There's something deeper going on between them that had pushed Matt to act in ways he would later regret. The police dug into Matt's past, uncovering his history with Lila and the complex emotions that had always simmered beneath the surface of their friendship. It was clear that Matt had always had feelings for her, though he had never expressed them openly. Was it possible that his unspoken love for Lila had led him to do something extreme, something that ultimately resulted in her death? Was it a crime of passion? Or was it something more calculated, something Matt had been hiding for years? On the night Lila disappeared, there had been reports of a stranger seen near the river, someone who didn't belong. A tall man dressed in dark clothing was spotted walking along the edge of the water. No one knew who he was or why he was there. Was he just passing through? Or had he been there for a darker reason? The stranger's appearance raised alarms among the police. No one in town recognized him, and his presence by the river that night seemed too coincidental. Was it possible that he had been the one who caused Lila's death? Had he been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? With no ID, no witnesses, and no clear motive, the stranger was an enigma, someone who seemed to have no ties to the town, but could very well be the key to unlocking the mystery of Lila's death. The police launched a search for the man, but there was no sign of him anywhere. His face was a ghost, a shadow that seemed to disappear whenever they got close. Had he left town? Or was he still hiding somewhere, waiting for the heat of the investigation to die down? And if he was involved, what was his connection to Lila? Was he an outsider who had simply crossed paths with her, or had he been someone closer to her life than anyone had realized? As the investigation continued, the weight of the unanswered questions hung over everyone, casting a long shadow over the small town. Each suspect held a key to the mystery, but which one would unlock the truth? And more importantly, who was willing to risk everything to protect it? Lila's parents were shattered. Her mother, once full of warmth and laughter, was now a shell of herself. Her father, a man who had always been the calm, steady presence in their home, stood silently in the corner of the living room, unable to comprehend that his daughter, his bright, beautiful daughter, was never coming home again. The weight of the loss was a physical thing, pressing down on them with an intensity that was almost suffocating. How could this happen? How could a life so full of promise and potential be stolen away in such a brutal, senseless? They couldn't wrap their minds around the idea that Lila was gone. She had been their everything, their joy, their pride, the child they had raised to be strong, independent, and full of dreams. And now that future was gone in the blink of an eye. Her mother could still hear Lila's laughter echoing in her mind, the sound that had once filled their home, a sound that would never be heard again. Her father, who had been her first hero, couldn't believe the world could be so cruel. They had held her in their arms when she was born, and now they had to say goodbye forever. Lila's friends, too, were devastated. They couldn't stop asking themselves the same question over and over. Why? Why did this happen to Lila? Why didn't they see the signs? Why hadn't they done more to protect her? A group of friends who had once shared laughter and lighthearted moments together now found themselves consumed by guilt and grief. How could they have missed it? Was there something they could have done? Something they overlooked? Each of them carried the burden of Lila's death in their own way, struggling to make sense of a tragedy that had shattered their world. Emma, Lila's best friend, had been with her the night she vanished, and the pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. She had lost not only her best friend, but her confidant, her other half. The two had shared everything, secrets, dreams, even fears. To lose Lila, to be the one who had last seen her, left Emma feeling hollow. Every moment of their friendship felt like a memory she could never get back. And now she had to live with the unbearable weight of knowing that she couldn't protect her. Matt, Lila's childhood crush, was equally torn. He had always been there for her, but he never had the chance to tell her how he truly felt. Lila had been the girl he'd admired from afar, the one who had captured his heart without ever knowing it, and now she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the regrets of words unspoken. Every corner of the town reminded him of her, the places they had gone together, the times they had shared. Now those memories were tainted by the overwhelming grief that consumed him. The whole town felt the weight of the loss. Lila had been one of their own, a bright, promising young woman who had the whole world in front of her. Her death was a wound to the community that could never heal. A small town that had once been full of hope and joy now carried the scars of this tragedy. It wasn't just Lila's family and friends who mourned her loss. It was everyone who had ever known her. Her death rippled through the community, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak and unanswered questions. Lila wasn't just another victim. She was a young woman with hopes, dreams, and a future that was taken away in a single tragic moment. She had been so full of life, so eager to make her mark on the world. She had talked for years about traveling, about seeing the world beyond their small town, Paris, New York, Tokyo. She had big plans, dreams, that stretched far beyond the confines of the place where she had grown up. Lila had wanted to explore, to experience new things, to meet new people. But even more than that, Lila had dreams of going to college, of furthering her education and making something of herself. She had been driven, smart, and determined. Her grades were top-notch, and she had already been accepted into several prestigious universities. Lila was on the cusp of something incredible. She was about to take that next step in her life, the one that would set her on the path to becoming everything she had ever hoped for. And just like that, all of it was taken away. A world that had seemed so full of promise, so wide open, was suddenly closed off forever. Lila's future, potential, ambition, stolen in an instant. Dreams she had fought so hard for were left unfulfilled. Her parents had imagined walking with her through that journey, seeing her off to college, watching her take those first steps into the adult world with pride and joy. But that future had been stolen in the most unimaginable way. Lila would never get to live out her dreams, and her family would never get to see her become the woman she was meant to be. And the community that had watched her grow would never forget the light she had brought to their lives, now extinguished far too soon. The tragedy wasn't just the loss of a life. It was the loss of all that could have been. Lila's dreams, her future, her very essence, had been stolen by a senseless act that left everyone around her searching for answers. What kind of world could take someone like Lila, someone with so much to give, and cut her story short? Death was a reminder of how fragile life could be. A single moment could change everything. But even in death, Lila's spirit lived on in the memories she left behind, the laughter, the joy, the dreams she had shared with others. She may have been taken too soon, but her legacy was just beginning. Community, friends, her family, they would remember her not for how she died, but for how she lived. They would fight to uncover the truth, to make sure that Lila's voice, her story, wasn't lost to the shadows. As the investigation continued to unfold, the complexity of Lila's death seemed to deepen with every new clue. Theories swirled, and the pressure mounted on law enforcement to uncover the truth. To shed light on what really happened that night by the river, we turned to two experts, one a criminologist and the other a psychologist, whose insights could help unravel the mystery that had consumed the town. Dr. Helena Wright, a criminologist with years of experience in homicide investigations, was called in to examine the physical evidence from Lila's death. Her analysis would prove invaluable in guiding the investigation toward a more focused theory. The fact that Lila was found so far from the river suggests foul play, Dr. Wright explained. When a person drowns, the body tends to be found relatively close to the site of the incident, typically within a few hundred feet, but Lila's body was found miles from the riverbank, which indicates that someone moved her. This is a crucial point in the case. But Dr. Wright's analysis didn't stop there. She shifted her attention to the injuries on Lila's body, which had been a significant part of the investigation's confusion. The bruises on her arms, the marks around her neck, and the signs of a struggle, all of these are indicators that Lila didn't simply fall into the water and drown, Dr. Wright continued. This isn't a typical drowning case. The marks on her neck suggest strangulation, and the bruises show that someone physically restrained her. Lila likely fought for her life, and her assailant, whoever they were, wasn't acting alone. This points to a premeditated attack. The criminologist's expert breakdown shifted the investigation's focus. This wasn't a simple accident or a random crime. The more they examined Lila's injuries, the more it became apparent that someone close to her, or at least someone who knew her, had played a central role in her death. To understand the psychological dynamics between the key suspects, Emma, Matt, and the mysterious stranger, we turn to Dr. Raymond Marks, a renowned psychologist who specialized in criminal behavior. Dr. Marks began by analyzing the relationships between Lila and the three primary suspects. When you look at these three individuals, you begin to see a clear pattern of jealousy, secrecy, and potential motive, he explained. Lila's death wasn't just a random act of violence. It was personal. Someone in that group wanted something more than just friendship. Emma had been Lila's best friend, but when we dig deeper, we see that their friendship wasn't without its complications, Dr. Marks observed. Friendships like theirs, particularly when one person is as vibrant and successful as Lila, can create feelings of envy or even resentment. Emma may have been the one closest to Lila, but that doesn't mean she didn't harbor her own complicated emotions. Did Emma feel overshadowed? Was there something about Lila's success, her popularity, or even her relationship with Matt that Emma couldn't handle? When people feel threatened, especially by someone they love, they can act in unexpected ways. Matt, on the other hand, had always been in love with Lila, Dr. Marks continued, his voice steady as he traced the psychological dynamics. But his feelings for her were never truly expressed, and that kind of suppressed emotion can lead to explosive consequences. When you're in love with someone who doesn't know or doesn't reciprocate your feelings, it can create a volatile mix of passion and frustration. Matt was there the night Lila disappeared, but his behavior during the search raised red flags. Was he acting out of guilt? Did he have a deeper, darker motive that we're not seeing yet? Then there's the stranger, Dr. Marks said, shifting his focus to the mysterious man who had been seen near the river that night. This is a key factor in the case. While we can't ignore the possibility that someone close to Lila was involved, we also have to ask, could this stranger be the one who ultimately pulled the trigger, or strangled in this case? Strangers are often underestimated in cases like these, but sometimes they are the very ones who slipped through the cracks. The fact that this man was near the scene and was never identified means he could be a critical part of the puzzle. Dr. Marks paused for a moment before continuing. Ultimately, what we're looking at is a web of complex emotions. There's a deep undercurrent of jealousy, unspoken love, and possibly even betrayal. At least one of these people, Emma, Matt, or the stranger, was driven by something more than friendship, and that's what makes this case so chilling. It's not just about finding who did this. It's about understanding why and what drove someone to commit such a heinous act. The investigation had reached a boiling point. After weeks of searching, questioning, and piecing together the fractured timeline of Lila's final hours, the police were closing in on their prime suspects. All signs pointed to Matt, Lila's childhood friend, the one who had secretly loved her for years. He had been there the night she disappeared, and his behavior during the search had seemed strangely detached and guilty. But just when the pieces seemed to fall into place, something unexpected happened. The truth started to surface, and the investigation was surprised. It wasn't until Matt was interviewed again, a final round of questioning designed to tie up loose ends, that the truth began to slip out. The police had already found inconsistencies in his earlier statements, but they hadn't yet uncovered the full extent of his feelings for Lila. During this final interview, a breakthrough came. Matt, under intense pressure, finally admitted something he had been hiding for years. A deep, unspoken obsession with Lila. I never told anyone, he confessed, his voice shaking, but I was in love with her. I always was. It had been a secret he had buried deep within himself, too ashamed to admit it even to his closest friends. Lila had been everything to him. Her laugh, her kindness, her beauty. He had watched her from afar for so long, always too afraid to tell her how he felt. She was his best friend, but in his heart, she was so much more. And when he saw her growing closer to others, especially with Emma, the jealousy and frustration began to consume him. Matt had been struggling with this internal battle for months, but it was the night of Lila's disappearance that things had reached a breaking point. As he sat there, trying to explain his feelings to the investigators, he admitted that he had become so desperate to be close to her that he couldn't control the anger that had built up inside him. His secret, repressed love had twisted into something darker. And Emma, she had known something was wrong between them. The revelation about Matt's obsession opened the door to another chilling detail. Emma, devastated by the idea of losing her best friend to Matt, had confronted Lila the night she disappeared. Emma had been terrified of what her feelings for Matt might mean for her friendship with Lila. If Matt finally confessed his love for her, what if Lila chose him? Emma's jealousy and insecurity had been simmering for weeks, and when she saw Lila drifting away from her, when she saw Lila laughing with Matt, it had pushed her to the edge. The confrontation between Emma and Lila had been heated, emotional, and full of unresolved tension. Emma had pleaded with Lila, telling her that Matt was dangerous, that he couldn't be trusted with her heart. But Lila, ever the optimist, had brushed off her concerns. She hadn't seen Matt's feelings as a threat, and she had been caught up in her own whirlwind of dreams and possibilities. Emma had walked away in anger, and Lila had continued to wander alone just moments before her life would end. It seemed like the perfect storm had been brewing between Matt and Emma, and the police were sure that one of them was involved. But there was one twist left, one last piece of the puzzle that neither Matt nor Emma could have anticipated. Just when it seemed like Matt might be the killer, new evidence came to light, something that would change everything. During a final sweep of Lila's room, the police discovered something hidden away in her closet, a small, leather-bound diary. It was a personal journal, one that Lila had kept secret from everyone, even from her closest friends. Inside, the pages revealed a different side of Lila's relationship with the mysterious stranger by the river, one she had kept hidden from everyone. The entries were intimate, revealing a connection between Lila and the stranger that no one had known about. Lila had met him a few weeks before her death, someone new to the town, a man who had come from out of nowhere. He had seemed charming, attentive, and Lila had been intrigued by him from the start. The diary was full of details about their secret meetings, their whispered conversations, and the growing attraction that Lila had felt for him. She had never told Emma or Matt about this new person in her life. It was as though she had been living a double life, one that none of her closest friends had known about. But what was most chilling was the final entry in the diary, the one that had been written just hours before she disappeared. It read, "Meeting him by the river tonight. I don't know what will happen, but I can't ignore how I feel anymore. He makes me feel alive in a way that no one else does." The entry left a deep mark on the investigation. Had Lila been planning to run away with this stranger? Was he the one who had lured her into the woods, away from the safety of her friends? And if so, what had happened during their meeting that night? Had he turned on her when she least expected it? The diary was a game changer. It painted a different picture of Lila's final hours, one that no one had anticipated. The stranger, the quiet man no one had thought much of, was now the central figure in her death. But was he truly the killer? Had he been another pawn in a twisted game, played by those who were closer to Lila than anyone realized? What do you think happened that night? Was Matt really responsible, or is there someone else hiding something? Could the mysterious stranger be the key to everything, or did Emma's jealousy push her over the edge? Leave your theories in the comments below and let's piece this together. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime mysteries. You won't want to miss the shocking conclusion to this one. The truth is closer than ever,